Hello, this is Jim Schaefer, executive producer and host of Rip Rap, the academic book television program. My guest today is Randal Baier. Today we'll be discussing books that Rip Rap has received, including those on the shock of violence and self-nurture. Welcome to Rip Rap, Randal. You've got the one on self-nurture there.
Okay, so this one moving along here, and maybe this is a good segue, right?
That's what I thought.
Alice Domar, PhD, and Henry Dreher. This is a national bestseller, Self-Nurture, Learning to Care for Yourself as Effectively as You Care for Everyone Else.
Yeah.
And that seems to segue just perfectly from Common Shock. The way they describe the book on the little blurb is, think about how you feel at the end of a day when every waking minute has been spent fulfilling obligations to other people. When you found your first free moment so late in the evening that you were too exhausted to enjoy it. If you've had too many days like this, you'll find the help you need to transform your life in self-nurture. And I guess the research and the clinical approach here is that we're looking for some kind of balance. And obviously, if we can nurture other people, take care of or care for other people, you don't want to forget your own self within.
But this is also part of the new reality where right now they're talking about the budget and the debt actions and so forth, and cutbacks in Social Security and Medicare. I've talked to a lot of people who are overwhelmed by trying to take care of relatives.
Yeah,
because
very common now.
Yeah,
I mean
because and even the ones that are in the nursing homes are overwhelmed because their funding is being cut back.
Right. And so we're not caring about our.
I went to see my
elders.
My aunt, who's in a nursing home, and the nurse went over to kind of rouse her. I didn't even recognize her.
Your aunt?
My aunt.
Yeah.
Because she was so far out of it. I mean, because she had so little attention paid to her that the nurse had to keep talking to her to bring her out. It was literally, she was coming up out of this
some kind of
state of unconsciousness, stupor, whatever you want to call it. And she was never that way. But, you know, it was just awful. Yeah. And then when she came up out of it, then she was her usual, you know, gregarious self. But that's unfortunately what's happened to a lot of people that just warehoused in these nursing homes. Yeah. And but people are overwhelmed. You put your relative in the nursing home, it's a lot of money, you know. And then you got all the other things, or they try to take care of them in the house. And if someone's got Alzheimer's, you really have your hands full.
This is happening in my own family and with my in-laws, because you know, Alzheimer's is a progressive type of thing in this particular case, and the decisions are made slowly, but they have to be made.
Sorry.
I see that we have some.
It's the Blue Angels who are performing.
Are they performing at Willow Run? Well, the Air Force is protecting us today, the Navy, or whatever they're. At any rate, the nurturing, you forget in caring that it's a full system. You really have to care for your own well-being as well. And it's easy to make lip service to that and say, oh yes, we have to make sure we spend time on ourselves unselfishly. But it's hard to, because everybody in a certain way, especially in a situation where you're actively caretaking for someone who is sick, there are things coming at you, people asking you for decisions. Clearly you have to make some decisions about money, about medical care, about just daily life, you know, daily functionings of the body and things like that.
Well, I have a colleague
takes a lot from you.
Whose husband is getting Alzheimer's. And the thing about Alzheimer's, they get to a certain point that they don't recognize you.
Yeah.
After a while, you establish a presence, maybe. Then you come back 5 minutes later, and you have to go through the whole thing all over, because they really, who are you? What are you doing here in my house? You know.
The other thing that seems to happen, and maybe this is partly what she goes into, is that you know, especially in a disease like Alzheimer's, where lots of functioning shuts down, especially recognition, memory, and, you know, your relationships for 50 years fall apart. And I lost my point. I think it had to do with recognition. The personality of the person who is the patient. Some of those paranoias or persnicketyness or various features, they start to come to the head, and they become extremely exaggerated. And that's hard on somebody who is a nurturing person, because you know, as a normal person, you might have a very particular way of ordering your desk, for instance. You might be a little compulsive about that. When you have Alzheimer's, you're thrown off completely. No way to handle any kind of difference. I mean, it just is exaggerated to the point where the caretaker is really stressed. Yeah, and you have to find some neutral space, I guess. I don't know.
And
I suppose this is how she's dealing with this issue.
And all of those supposedly simple tasks of daily living become enormous.
Enormous, right.
Because just eating can be dangerous.
It's true, because the physical functions start to shut down too. Yeah. The ability to swallow and things like that.
Just the simplest things. And what's happened with my colleague is that she's just overwhelmed, you know.
Yeah.
And so they have these different functions where, you know, they have now adult daycare.
Yeah, yeah.
But those programs are being cut back because of budget problems.
It's a that's cycle. It's just
a life-giving service for someone who is 24/7. Because someone with Alzheimer's, they'll wander off. We just had a case of that here in Detroit area. Well, actually, the guy was kidnapped.
Ooh.
You know, he was taken right out of the nursing home, but still there's also other ones that will walk off.
Walk away.
There was one last winter that was found frozen to death, you know, just because he walked off.
Yeah, I heard about that. Yeah.
And then they found him finally.
Right, he was out.
But they'll move. I mean, there is no day or night with them, you know, because they're not in the normal set of things.
Yeah, right. Well, it's a mind deterioration.
So like I say, you can say all you want about, well, take care of yourself, but when you're trying not, you know, and a lot of people just don't have the money for help.
Yeah, right.
When you're trying to keep this loved one alive, that can be just enormously draining.
Yeah. Well, I think Alice Domar tries to get through some of these, I don't know about the specific with Alzheimer's, but about caretaking in general. She has titles, for instance, of Mind, Body, Nurture, the basics of mind and body nurture, which is very interesting, or critical. Mother-daughter, nurturing self in the family. I think she seems to take this as a kind of metaphor, mother-daughter, but also that's a dynamic that is also very potent. The sacred body, from shame to celebration. Love mates, self-nurture with significant others. Child's play, friends and siblings. Joy at work, also important. I mean, we spend 8 to 10 hours a day with people that we are not really all that intimate with on a certain level. I mean, you know, they're not our family. We don't necessarily call them up after 5 o'clock and, you know, tell them our problems, but things happen. But we work with a bunch of people who, on the other level, it is intimate. You're spending a lot of time with them, you know. And faith factor, singular spirituality. She seems to cover all aspects of nurturing that
I think there's certain tasks and professions that particularly need a self-conscious attending to this. Teaching, nurses, first responders, because I've had students who have been ambulance drivers, and it's taken its toll on them. They say, "Oh, I can do the job," and it obviously has taken a toll on them. Nurses, all kinds of counselors. It's starting to really wear at them, you know. So if they had some conscious boundaries and set up activities so they do take care of themselves, it'd really be helpful for them to do that.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I think that's a great message because we do expect a lot from those people, and they really, if your ambulance driver is having a bad day, and he or she is coming to get you in an accident, they have to be able to set it aside and concentrate on the injured party.
Oh, I tell my
on the
students
situation.
We're not machines. We're human beings.
And yet, how do you do that?
Yeah. Well, we're not machines. We're human beings. So we need to learn how to live with all this stuff.
Yeah.
But it's not automatic. It's not like you just can, turn
it on and turn it off. Yeah.
Well,
right.
march through it and all that stuff.
Right.
You
Without
are
being
having an effect on it. This next book is The Age of Doubt, Tracing the Roots of Our Religious Uncertainty by Christopher Lane.
Interesting.
And what I thought was fascinating is that it talks about the Victorian era was the first great age of doubt. I never put that together, A critical moment in the history of Western ideas, said leading 19th century intellectuals battled the church and struggled to observe radical scientific discoveries that upended everything the Bible had taught them about the world.
Darwin comes along, plus just
Robert Chambers and Bronte, Charles Darwin.
Well, new religions, just confrontations with new ways of the whole post-age of exploration and the height of colonialism in terms of the West, but confrontations or realizations that there are totally different ways of perceiving the world.
It
and
talks
appreciation
about
for that.
The dramatic adjustment of Victorian society has echoes today as technology, science, and religion grapple with moral issues that seemed unimaginable even a decade ago. Yet the Victorians' crisis of faith generated a far more searching engagement with religious belief than the new atheism that evolved today. But I never thought of the Victorian age as an age of doubt.
We're talking about this primarily in the Anglo-American kind of life, or not so much the French or the German or the...
Well, and they're talking about, Britain and natural history and upheaval in mid-Victorian England when the issue achieved critical mass. Major debates in the early 1860s turned out to be turning points for cultural arguments that had flared in the 1830s. It began to attract wide audiences in the 1840s, such as J. Anthony Froude's Nemesis of Faith. Theological explanations for scientific phenomenon lost significant ground in Britain, and secular arguments, once limited to a relatively small group of freethinkers, began to draw greater interest. So you had these Reasoner, these secularist free-thinking journals, National Reformer. I just never quite put all that together with this. It's really fascinating.
It was the height of the Hyde Park corner in London, where these arguments went on and on.
At the same time, you could. And here's the thing about in 1860, uncertainty becomes a way of life. You're coming out of the most harshest, dogmatic eras, I think, in history. And
I'm kind of curious about how this is a result of, imperial expansion taking over India, parts of Africa, Asia. The British were in Hong Kong. The British were all over what is now Malaysia and Singapore, and of course India and Africa, all their trade. But certainly the appreciation, there were elements, cultural elements that appreciated Hindu culture, Buddhist culture, what they called Mohammedan culture.
I like that point.
And spiritual cultures of animists, native.
The same power that allowed them to capture all these countries also unleashed forces that ended up undoing the empire.
Yes, yeah.
So they're talking
here. I wonder how many doubters, so to speak, were actually sympathetic through the learning, trying to understand, say, Hinduism, for instance, rather than thinking of it as exotic or perverse or incorrect or wrong or heathen. It was accepted as, you know, a beautiful spiritual message, which actually was quite in contrast to Christianity.
Or were they enthralled with the power of empire to imagine that they didn't have to believe the accepted dogma? That they could just reach past that and do whatever they wanted to.
They meaning these
scientists and thinkers and philosophers and theologians.
Well, that's a good point. Enthralled that here's another world that we've discovered or conquered, I guess. But, I mean, it is true. Even sympathy for the other is so connected to imperialism and conquest that you can't really, in many ways, you can't really separate.
But then you also have these big blockbuster experiences, like they're talking about on June 30, 1860, is when Charles Darwin's controversial bestseller was discussed by the British Association for the Advancement of Science. On the origin of species by means of natural selection, or the preservation of favored races and the struggle for life. By the way, it's always fascinating to know, people know about the part of the title, the origin of species, but they don't know the rest of the title.
It was one of those enormous tomes from the 19th century that had an enormous long title expressing, you know, all these other sort of aspects to what the research was about. And it's true, the bit about the races
that's what people don't.
and the species, this is where in the early, goes to the history of anthropology itself, which comes out of this very, you know, imperial kind of Anglo-American, European tracing of culture, was specifically this kind of racial categorization and species hierarchy of you know, the Europeans being the fittest, so to speak, and the primitives. Whereas what they discover is that the primitives have enormously complex social and cultural structure, almost more complex than.
Well, I didn't quite realize that, you know, Darwin's thing was, as it said, it began to send shockwaves through the nation. But I didn't realize that one of the proponents was the Reverend Baden-Powell, the Oxford civilian professor of geometry, and also father of the
Boy Scouts.
Had praised his ideas on evolution, arguing that Darwin's masterly volume detailed the grand principle of the self-evolving powers of nature. For whatever reason, he really liked this work. And that it said both the scientists and men of the cloth, this is fascinating to me, wanted to discuss the book's argument and found themselves on either side of a fairly sharp divide. So it like unleashed this whole profound discussion about how things are organized. And it says, today the Oxford University Museum is partitioned into administrative offices with only a plaque inside to mark the occasion. But on that morning, the hall hummed with a crowd of more than 700.
Wow.
The presentations on Darwin's book had not been widely publicized, but the tension was considerable. The crowd grew restive as John William Draper, an English-born scholar visiting from the United States, meandered through an hour-long talk on the intellectual development of Europe, considering with reference to the views of Mr. Darwin and others. People in the audience heckled him, one even tried to cut in. I mean, we don't...
You don't think about that?
No.
Yeah. And we think of it much more, as you say, in terms of the specific aspect of evolution of organisms and you know, flora and fauna.
And then one of the other people there was Samuel Wilberforce, Bishop of Oxford. And when he began ridiculing evolutionary theory, it looked as if the assembled traditionalists and clergy would win the debate by a landslide.
But they're confronting I mean, this, I guess, would be called the intelligent design argument of 150 years ago, maybe. We're talking about a resistance to, of course, this was brand new theory at the point. Now we've got, you know, sort of more or less a proven paradigm. But you've got the same reaction in a pure way. And I guess that's where the doubt comes. You're suddenly questioning.
Well, and guess who else was there? Thomas H. Huxley, who defended Darwin and attacked the bishops, you know, attacking the... And I guess a woman apparently screamed and then fainted at hearing a bishop insulted so publicly. I mean, but see, again, it's within the empire at its peak, unleashing all this stuff, and I think people don't quite... Oh, the woman was Lady Brewster, wife of the renowned Scottish physicist and philosopher Sir David Brewster. But I'm just saying, there's this moment in history when all this stuff had been unleashed, and there's intense interest, you know, in preserving the dogma of empire, and then there's people not accepting it.
So she's talking about the... we have to get our pronouns right in English, don't we? Yeah, so we identify our genders. It's funny. The period of I guess the core of the Victorian era.
Yeah.
I mean,
late 1800s.
Wasn't she crowned in like 1850 or something?
Yeah,
1855?
30s, 40s, 50s.
So we're talking, I don't actually know, but she lived to be, what, was it?
Time Victoria.
1901 or 1899. At any rate, we're talking like 1860 to 1900, the real core Victorian age.
And there's another part to this. Faith-based certainty meets the gospel of doubt.
The gospel of doubt.
But I think what you're pointing out is the role of empire is crucial here. That if you're powerful, you can look at the negative, you can look at the other side of reality.
Well, actually, yeah, without having to be confronted by it. Right.
Well, you're not concerned with it because you know you have the power to overcome it.
Right. Maybe the doubt comes in when you realize that some of those bricks are falling apart in your wall of power. I don't know. I mean,
well, and even they talked about Freud's 1929 treatise on man's unhappiness in culture comes out of this. You know,
right?
Which caused a dilemma. Having described how a recent book of his treated religious ideas as an illusion, Freud stopped almost dead in his tracks. It was not that he failed to grasp the urgency of such wishes. A sense of their appeal was simply not in him. So, but I mean, there's this enormous outpouring of really intense thinking about what's going on. What is dogma? What is the religious way? What else can you do?
Well, it reads as both a history and a sort of a cultural philosophy, I guess.
You got.
Should we go on?
Yeah.
Wendy Kopp, founder of Teach for America. What works and what doesn't in providing an excellent education for all? This book is called A Chance to Make History. What works and what doesn't in providing excellent education to all. It's got quite a number of bona fides in the back, published by this, is it Public Affairs Press, I think? Public Affairs Press, New York. And we're talking about change leadership, scaling success systems, increasing the pace of change, transformational teaching as the foundation for transformational change. I don't know, it seems to be a 1 in a million books on change, transformation, excellent teaching, and how we can get ahead in the world where we don't seem to teach. We rather force, I want to use the word knowledge, but that's a laden term. We force intellectual stuff on people that they need to know in order to get by.
Well, there's an interesting thing going on right now where they have the curriculum. Have you seen
the capital C curriculum? Oh, is this published by
K-12?
the U.S.
No,
federal
K-12.
government or Michigan?
This is required now in the state of Michigan. You have the complete K-12 curriculum.
Right.
And it's coming to the colleges, universities too now. But right now, so my colleagues who are teaching writing and English and that stuff, they have to get in all the different points in the curriculum because their principals are requiring it, and the concern is the kids have to test well on the standardized tests.
You're talking community college? Or are you talking
K-12, kindergarten through 12th grade?
The principals meaning principals of the schools. Yes, yeah. I mean, it's in our town as well. I'm glad that my children are now not in elementary school anymore, or even high school. They're now entering college or entering grad school, so they can perhaps get away from that kind of prescribed.
Well, there's this insanity happening where they think apparently educators are those responsible. I wouldn't say educators, but those who are administering education, politicians, think that education is just sort of you put a nickel in, you get a candy bar back. It's all commodified. It's not a learning process.
Right. Well, now see, I think there is a place for prescribed physical, discrete knowledge that will actually get results. But at the same time, we're not allowing a space for thinking in some ways. We're putting more emphasis on getting something done that you can say this mathematical formula will result in this kind of stress on steel. We need you to design the next best car, and you need to know how that stress works so that the thing won't fall apart. She tends to confront this. Silver Bullets and Silver Scapegoats is one of her chapter titles. Wendy Kopp, a chance to make history. So at any rate, thank you.
Thank you for being on Rip Ab again.
Being here, got through a few this time.
Yeah. All right.
Great.
Thank you.